I grew up in a strategy world where you're making decisions and policy to try to generate rising profits and cash flow for shareholders. And you might think that there's no connection with public policy questions at all. Well, that's not quite true. If we think about what we have to do in strategy in the business world, we have to think in terms of who we're trying to serve, with what, and how we're going to do it. So let's take a simple example. Anyone here flown with Ryanair? And lived to tell the tale? Okay. Well, who are they serving? Well, they're not serving, by and large, they're not serving business travellers. Right? Who are they serving? They're serving young people, they're serving couples. They're serving them, those are the groups that they're serving. For what needs? Well, for cheap travel for holidays and weekend breaks, those kinds of things. They're not serving them typically for long-haul holidays going to the Caribbean or the Far East. So that's what they offer, and to whom. How do they do it? They do it by locating at the cheapest airports they can possibly find. In fact, I believe it's the case that some airports actually pay Ryanair to fly there rather than the other way around. I believe that's the case. It certainly was at one time. This sometimes means that the airport is quite a long way from the city that they are supposed to be serving. So I flew to Oslo with Ryanair many years ago, and it was an hour and a quarter's bus ride from the airport into Oslo. I'm not sure the airport was actually in Sweden, but it might have been. But it was a long way. So how do they do it? Now that means that they can keep their costs really, really low. When you got on the aeroplane with Ryanair, you'll probably notice you didn't go through one of those sucky tube things that kind of sticks on the side of the aeroplane. You didn't kind of walk through that, did you? What did you do? You clambered up some stairs. Why? Because by clambering up stairs at the front and the back of the aircraft, they can turn an aircraft around in 20 minutes. You can't do that if you're going to taxi into a gate and put the sticky tube on and suck people out and then wait for the other lot to be squirted back in again. You can't do it in 20 minutes if you do it that way. So that's how. So that's the kind of strategy for Ryanair. But that really doesn't say it at all. Really, there's much more to it than that. They've got to figure out what we call a time-phased action plan. What are we going to do? How much? When? In all functions? With what outcomes? And how do you keep changing that as time goes on? So what do they have to do? They have to buy aircraft. They have to open new airports that they're going to serve. They have to start new services between those airports. They have to hire staff. They have to train staff. They have to do marketing. They have to set prices. Now those decisions are continually being made. This is not, if you think about the first question, who are we going to serve with what and how, that's basically the same today as it was in 1995 when they started the airline. Hasn't changed, right? But those decisions are made all the time. And why do we need that? Well, because that's the only way that you can figure out what the performance results are going to be. So there's the corporate world for you. And in the corporate world, of course, that's how many passengers are we going to fly, how many people are we going to employ, what sales revenue are we going to generate, how much euros, millions are we going to take from passengers, what costs are we going to incur, how much do we have to spend on the aircraft, and what profits are we going to make. So that's the results that we're looking for in the corporate world. Nothing to do with public policy, of course. That's all completely different, isn't it? Well, is there a parallel? Well, that's what it looks like in the business world. What does it look like in public policy? Well, public services actually exist to serve the public, surprisingly enough. On any dimension of what a council or the government does, there is usually some sense of beneficiaries, people who are going to benefit from the services that government or councils provide. What services, though? So, do we provide housing for loads and loads of people, or do we provide them with the means to escape the need to actually have housing provided for them? Many, many years ago, a master's student of mine at London Business School did a study on homelessness in London, and discovered there was quite a shift going on between The old model used to be, there's homeless people on the streets, we've got to feed them and look after them and keep them comfortable, right? Over time, the services to do with homelessness have shifted away from that towards, towards what do you think? Not you know, the audience, right? So we used to just make sure we fed them on the streets. What do we try to do for homeless people now? Help them stop being homeless, right? Actually, there's an even smarter thing that we should be trying to do. What's that? Stop them becoming homeless in the first place. I think the data from when my student did that work many years ago was that something like a quarter of homeless people were former members of the armed forces. Right? So figure out why people are getting into difficult situations in the first place and try to choke off the causes of that problem arising in the first place. You know, we spend so much time and effort, so much cost in public services trying to fix problems. If only we'd prevented the problem arising in the first place, you know. We do it in the corporate world too. Please don't run away with the idea that the corporate world is kind of super smart and does amazing things and the public sector don't. That just isn't true. There is some pretty awesome stuff done in the public sector. So, there is a strategy. Who are we going to serve, with what, and how are we going to do it? Are we going to provide the housing, or are we going to pay private landlords to provide the housing? Then we need this kind of this time-phased action plan. So what service features are we going to add over time? How many people do we need to employ to provide these services? What costs are we going to incur in doing it? Should we add capacity? Should we be building new housing? Should we be providing childcare places so people can get jobs? Those are all continuing decisions that you have to take. And then what's the performance outcome that we want? Well, we may not be aiming to kind of maximise profits like we are in the corporate world or maximise profit growth, but we do have to be concerned about cost. So we can't ignore the financials. But the other side of the balance here is that what we're trying to do is achieve benefits for the public. All right? So we have got performance outcomes. They're just not quite the same as they are in the corporate world. Very, very similar. The other thing to say about the public sector is that the strategic challenges the public sector faces are very often much more complex than in corporate cases. Why would that be? Any idea why it would be more difficult in public sector situations, in public policy? When Ryanair is trying to make decisions, who do you think makes the decisions? The people at the top, right? So here we've got an organisation doing something and there's somebody at the top, usually delegating a little bit, but there are other people underneath them, but they basically decide what's going to happen and it happens, right? What's different about public policy cases? Yes, there are multiple decision makers involved, okay? There are community groups, there is the council itself, there is the government, there is the police force, there are the social services. You've got multiple stakeholder groups, all of whom have got different roles to play and different objectives that they're pursuing in the same situation. So public policy cases are genuinely more complicated. Okay, so here's the case that we're going to look at right now. We're going to try and help single parents back into work. What's the strategy here? Who are we trying to serve? Single parents, mostly, but not exclusively mothers, mostly in poorer families and mostly unskilled. Okay? What services are we going to provide to help this thing to happen? Well, we're going to provide access to affordable childcare. So the game you're going to play makes some rather simplistic assumptions about what these choices are, one of which is that you simply subsidise childcare places. The next thing is access to training. Okay. Now, if your single parents are unemployed because they haven't got the skills to get the jobs that are available, they need training. But then they can't take the training because they can't get the childcare. So should you invest in childcare capacity, in training capacity, and pay for some of that training, and subsidise the childcare places so that single parents can get back into work? Right? That's basically what it is. Oh, there we go. The last bit there. How are we going to do it? Invest in childcare capacity, subsidise childcare places, and provide training at the childcare centres. But what exactly are we going to do? How much? At what time? At what cost? And what impact do we think this is going to have on the problem? So here's where Tower Hamlets is, and we've got some of the poorest families in London, just a couple of hundred metres away from some of the richest, some of the largest wealth there is. And we've got, there's the population, there's the economically active population and unemployed, and we've got a lot of children living in poverty, 47% of whom are in single-parent families. So if we solve the single-parent family, unemployed single-parent family problem to some degree, we'll never solve it completely, we'll go a long way to helping children out of poverty. And then if we take a longer-term view on this, if we help them out of poverty, then maybe we break a cycle. And the next generation is not living in poverty. Yeah. So that's another thing about the public sector. We're often looking at kind of very long timescale things. There might be a long time of kind of worse before better. Got to keep on plugging away before you get the system to tip over and start to fix itself. So what does the single parent topic consist of? Well, it consists of the single parents themselves, who can be in three states. They can be employed, they can be jobless, or they can be in training. All right? There's quite a few simplifications being made here, but for the sake of this exercise, that's the focus of the problem. They generate demand for childcare, but it needs to be affordable if that demand is going to be there. If it can't be affordable, then they don't generate any demand for it. But that demand for childcare is also coming from other childcare users. The nature of the benefit system determines whether more people or fewer people want childcare capacity or not. And of course, the availability of jobs. If there are more jobs that need to be done, then there are more places for people to get jobs, but that means that there's more demand for childcare. So that demand for childcare is likely to result, if that goes up, it's likely that new childcare capacity will be created. So what is childcare capacity? You tell me. What forms does childcare capacity take? Go on, speak up. Huh? Nannies, yeah, childminders, who have to be registered, by the way. You can't just kind of say, I'm a childminder and open your door. You have to be registered and go through various checks. They're covered by the CQC, aren't they?
Yeah, Ofsted registered.
Ofsted, yeah. Okay, so they have to be registered. And any other forms of childcare? Nurseries, absolutely, yeah. And there are things like after-school clubs as well. So one of the simplifications here is I'm not splitting the childcare demand between demand for preschool children to be cared for and school-aged children. In practice, of course, that's a very substantial and important distinction. Yeah, Philip.
There's even another granularity, which is those 0 to 2, 3 to 4.
Okay. All right, so we're just kind of lumping that all together in one category. Now, the thing is, would you start a nursery if there was demand for more childcare? You might, if you were being paid enough to make it worthwhile, okay? So if your nursery is kind of 80% full, and someone comes along and says, I'd like a place in your nursery, you say, well, okay, well, the price is X. I don't know what X is in Tower Hamlets. Was
£6.50 is the government subsidy, so normally it's around
£8
£8.
an hour. So, okay, if you're willing to pay £8 an hour, you can have a place, all right? So that kind of goes on until all the people who can pay for childcare places have got them, and all the nurseries are full. What about the people who can't afford to pay the full price for childcare? Would you start a nursery if the only people you could get were people who couldn't afford to pay? Right? So you see that's a double-headed arrow there, right? So demand for childcare is created if there is affordable capacity available, but then affordable capacity is only available if there's demand for it and if it's paid for. Okay, so we've got a ton of two-way causality, which causes all kinds of trouble when you try to just rely on statistical methods for these things. That requires investment. All right, you've got to put money into providing that, and local training should move single parents around in this state here. So it obviously moves them from just being jobless to being in training. But after training, they might still be jobless, but now they're skilled jobless. And that means their chances of becoming employed has now gone up. Right? So that's what you've got to kind of think about. But that training opportunity also requires childcare capacity. All of that costs money, and what are our performance requirements out of this? Well, our performance measures are how many unemployed single parents have we got, and what is it all costing? That's basically the balance that you have to achieve. So how do we model all this? Well, the first thing to say is don't even think about doing this on a spreadsheet, right? It can't be done, right? It's just not fit for purpose is the phrase. If you go to this link now, so this is a kind of control panel that sits on top of this model that we're going to play with, and you can zoom in and out like this. If you want to make things a little bit easier to see, you can scroll around, and down the left here there is a little bit of an explanation about what the model does. I've basically told you all this already, so don't worry about it too much. Just scroll across a little bit so the panel is kind of over to the left of the screen a little bit. So let me just explain what these charts are. The charts are running over 104 weeks, so this is 2 years in weeks. And the chart at the top there, this is the number of places available and needed. The red is childcare places available, blue is places needed for employed and trainees, and the green is total places needed. There's not very much difference between these numbers at the moment, but if you make some quite substantial decisions, those lines may well move apart. This is where are the single parents. So the red line is the total number of single parents, and that line is going up. Remember when we were talking about homelessness, there was this question about, well, it would be good to get people out of homelessness, wouldn't it? Well, wouldn't it be good if they didn't become homeless in the first place? So some policies we aren't really investigating here at all, but could, and maybe should, is there anything we can do to slow or reverse this increase in the number of single parents? You know, maybe with better family support we can stop families breaking up, that kind of thing. Now that would mean that the red line, instead of going up, would actually be coming down, which would reduce the scale of the problem that we're trying to solve in getting single parents into work. The blue line is the total number of single parents who are in jobs, and the green line is the total number of single parents who are jobless. And right down at the bottom here, there's a little purple line, which is the number of single parents who are in training. So what you need to do, you want the blue line to go up, you want the green line to go down, and you might have a bit of purple line to help in those outcomes. Thing is, you have not got unlimited money. You can't just keep spending all the money you want. So this thing down here is the total of the public costs. And I think that chart goes up to about 90,000 per week. These are all kind of made up numbers, but they're kind of plausible. So we're looking at a population of around just over 1,000 single parent families. And these public costs that chart goes up to nearly £100,000 per week. So what are those costs? Well, the blue costs, the blue line is the cost of benefits for single parents. Okay? So that's benefits paid to them because they need some kind of income to keep themselves and their children. Right? The orange line is the cost of subsidised childcare places. So you have decided that you are going to pay for some childcare places for single parents. The purple line is the cost of creating training places. It takes about 10 weeks, and this is, I don't know, we find a room in a hall somewhere, maybe something like this, and we say, we're going to turn this into a training centre. So we might have to fit it out with some stuff, we might have to provide some furniture, we might have to spend some other stuff. And that spending is spread over the 10 weeks of creating this training centre. Once you've created the training centre, you then incur the green costs. And the green costs are the costs of actually running the training centres. Okay? And add them all up and you get the red line. The red line is the total cost to the public purse of the unemployed single parent situation, right? in very simple terms. So how do you actually run this? Everyone see down at the bottom here, it's just off the bottom of the screen, but you should see a little up arrow. See that? Little up arrow there. Oh. Right. And you then get a green button that you can press. So press the green button, and this creates what's called a comparison run. Now all the lines on the charts have gone thin. They were quite thick, but they've now gone thin. And those thin lines are, if you like, the base case. This is a case where I put some decisions into the model and the model simply said, here's the result. You are now back at time zero and you have two decisions that you can take. Training places funded. -1 there simply says use the base case decisions that I put in there. So if you think it would be a good idea to create 50 training places, stick 50 in there and hit the play button. You can pause any time, play, pause, play, pause. So that decision I just took caused expenditure to be made on creating training places. And it is about to change the operating costs. If I run on a little further, actually, you can do this too. Yeah? You can just remove that run, start it all over again. I'm going to create 200 training places. I think training places is a really good idea. So, I have created 200 training places. Watch guys, this is a quite important point here. I created 200 training places, but I haven't got any people in training. Why have I got no people in training when I created training places? There's no childcare for them. Okay? So I think what I better do is provide some subsidised childcare as well. There we go. And now I've got some people in training. Okay, so the number of people in training is going up, and the number of people employed is still coming down, but hopefully those people will start to get a job. Okay, you got the idea? So your challenge is that I want you to give me the highest number of employed parents that you can by the end of the period, but you're not allowed to go over 100,000 in total public costs. Okay? That's the limit. No more than 100,000. You can go up to 100,000 for a long time if you want, but no more. Okay. We'll see. You can just go and do this again yourself. All right. The link isn't going to go away. You can go and play it at home on your tablet. Why don't you see what you can do and not spend more than 50,000? Perhaps. Right. Yeah, you were okay. Weren't you? Oh yeah, on that basis, you guys would be the winners, wouldn't you? So, yeah, these guys kept the rules. They didn't go over 100, which was the main thing. So yeah, you can play this yourself. It's not yet a very proven model. We've got to do a little bit more playing with it to kind of get the gaming a little bit more realistic and check that it kind of reflects reality a bit better. That's probably something I need to work with Philip about. But this is an example of, when you're trying to get people engaged in a new way of looking at things, you can't stand at the front and just kind of talk at them. You've got to give them a chance of getting engaged and trying it and feeling it and saying, oh, that's not right, or getting their heads around it. And this is a complicated system. Yeah. If you want to see how complicated it is, just go back to the model and scroll down. So that little part of the model there is tracking people moving between jobless in the middle and employed on the right, in training on the left, and the upper path is for skilled parents and the lower part is for unskilled parents. Okay? Now, this probably looks very unfamiliar. I've not seen anything like this before, but the mental parallel is really quite simple. Think of every object here on the screen as a column in a spreadsheet. And the name, the variable name, is the top cell in the column, and you've got 104 values going down. Okay? One for each week. The curvy arrows are like cell references. So if this was column F and this was column G would be using the values from column F. Right? That's what it's doing. I don't think I have time, but inside each of these is a formula, and the formula just runs all the way down the column. That's the way to think about it. But there are some advantages to this over and above using spreadsheets, not least of which is it's almost impossible to make cell reference errors, right? Because you can only use what's linked. So there's some statistics in the corporate world. I don't know if the same is true in public policy, Philip, but a professor who researches these things has data that suggests that 80% of corporate spreadsheets have got fundamental errors in them. So significant as to make their results wrong. Now, why do these models work when other models can't? And it's not that other models could, but they don't. Other models can't do this. And the reason they can't do this is because these models capture what's known as accumulation. Things build up over long periods of time. Okay? Now what that means is that you get very long delays between actions that you take and the consequences of those actions, whether for good or bad. Okay? We very often take actions that seem to be quite helpful in the short term, but actually they just make things worse in the long term. That was the thing with providing food and comfort for homeless people on the streets. I think it was the founder of The Big Issue who was the first to really go public and say, look, feeding people on the streets is just a way of making homelessness worse. Because you make it more difficult to get people off the streets and prevent them going there in the first place. So that's an example of accumulation, that the populations build up over long periods of time. There is interdependence in the system in both directions. Okay, so we've got interdependence between demand for childcare and provision of childcare, demand for training places, provision of training places. And what that means is that you've got to get decisions right all over the map. There's no such thing as this is the right decision here. This is the right decision here if that's the right decision there, and that's the right decision there. Okay? There is feedback in the system. So if you start getting, for example, if you start getting some savings in the cost of supporting single parents, and you put those savings back into support to get more single parents back into work, that's a feedback effect. And if more single parents get back into work and word spreads around the community about how good this is, and they see their neighbours being better off and being able to go on holiday or whatever it is, then other people then get motivated to take advantage of these facilities. This is a really important one. All over the place there are threshold effects. Okay, so nothing happens as you change something, and then all of a sudden it really does happen. Okay. A good example is service quality. Imagine that you're calling into a call centre, I don't know, to some support centre on something. So there's people all over the country in these big call centres, and calls are coming in. Let's say they can take 1,000 calls an hour, and they're actually getting 800 calls an hour. Service quality? Okay. 900 calls an hour? Service quality? Okay. 950 calls an hour? Service quality okay. 1,010 calls an hour? Service quality suddenly falls off a cliff. Okay, so that's a threshold effect. And it can be of both kinds. So there can be good things that should happen and don't until you've moved a long, long way, and suddenly you trigger the good consequences. But also we get bad surprises. Everything seems to be okay until suddenly it isn't. And the science behind this, called system dynamics, it was developed at MIT in the 1960s. It was built explicitly and quantitatively to deal with all four of those mechanisms. That's what it was designed for. And if you want to know what the science behind it is, it's the principles of what's known as engineering control theory. Now, you probably don't know this, but you've actually got engineering controls in your home. Right? If you have a boiler and the boiler keeps your water hot, there is an engineering control loop which looks at the temperature of your boiler. If it drops, it turns the boiler on. If it gets too high, it turns the boiler off. Okay, that's a control system. And all that the professor who invented this did was he said, well, I can take those engineering control principles and I can apply them to business systems, to social systems, to economic systems, to environmental systems. It's immensely powerful. Now, I said there is no other way of doing it, of dealing with dynamically complicated problems. That's not quite true. There are two other styles of simulation modelling that can do all of those things. One is agent-based modelling. You've seen these models of how diseases spread around a geographic area, and infected people move to another area, and then we see people getting infected in that area, and then the infection dies down as people recover. That's an agent-based model. Discrete event simulation is the kind of simulation you see maybe on things like railway network controls, where you're actually watching trains move from place to place. So you're tracking individual entities moving through a system. So those two methods can do some of this. The advantage of this one for these kinds of purposes is that this method is capable of encompassing a wide range of interdependent topics. So we've got training, and we've got homelessness, and we've got training, we've got joblessness, we've got cost, we could have multiple other sectors in this model, but as it happens, we don't. I will leave you, I think, to just go through the rest of these slides. I've given you the link to get the slides, and you'll find a full explanation of the structure of the model in it. And you have got the model, so you can go down and look at the model. You can run one of these comparison runs. You can see what the numbers do. You can go down and look at the model and see what the model is doing to generate the results. And as I say, just go through these slides to follow what's actually going on.